Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. I think we are ready to start. I welcome all of you that have joined from different parts of the world to our webinar, Evaluation to Connect the SDGs with National Priorities. Prior to introducing our speakers this morning, let me share with you some important information. You will be muted during the entire webinar. If you are not muted directly by us, please mute yourself. That is to avoid background noises. If you have any concern or technical problem, please write your concerns or issues on the chat bar, and my colleagues Thomas and Celeste will be eager to support you. You can also write comments or questions that you have while the speakers are presenting on the chat bar. We will share with you the recording of this webinar as well as the PowerPoint a few days after the presentation, after this webinar. Please bear with us. Rest assured that we will share not only with the participants that are here with us, but we will share through the networks, the different networks and the different listservs on evaluation. It will also be posted in the EVALSDGs website and the SDGs website and the IIED website. So without further ado, let me introduce the webinar. Bringing people together is powerful. The guide on evaluation to connect the SDGs with national priorities was inspired by a workshop attended by 33 government representatives and evaluation specialists from 22 countries hosted in Helsinki in March 2019. The event was jointly organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, EVALSDGs, IIED, and UNICEF. So this event is aimed at sharing with you the guidebook on evaluation to connect the SDGs with national priorities while raising awareness of the role evaluation can play in the context of the 2030 Agenda. On the 2030 Agenda. Okay, I want to make sure that everybody is hearing me. Everybody is hearing me correctly?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Then I will continue presenting the speakers this morning. Our first speaker will be Stefano D'Errico. Stefano is the head of Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning at the International Institute for Environment and Development, IIED. Since April 2016, Stefano has been leading the production of the series Effective Evaluation for SDG, which has resulted in 14 knowledge products co-developed with different partners. And you can see the different partners there. Stefano is a main author of the guidebook, and he will be introducing the guidebook and giving us an introduction to the guidebook, as well as will share with you the main context of this important resource. Without further ado, over to you, Stefano. Gonzalo, you can switch on your video and switch it off on again when you speak. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Stefano. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ada. I hope everybody can hear me fine. If not, please let me know in the comments. So I'm going to share a presentation while I speak. And first of all, I would like to say thanks to all the partners for co-organizing these events, so the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, EVALSDGs, UNICEF, and special thanks actually to UNICEF who is hosting this webinar. So I'm going to share a presentation now. Great, so the sound works. Bear with me 1 second. It's probably going to take a little bit to load. So, as Ada was saying, the guide is very much a collaboration. Oh, beautiful. It looks like it's loading on my screen, so hopefully it's loading on everybody's screen.
Yes, go ahead, Stefano. All is good.
Great. Thank you. So, evaluation to connect national priority with the SDGs. So this guidebook is very much a journey done with partners. It's the end of a journey done with several partners. And what we've tried to do there is actually to bring together the learning and experiences from many different peoples and from different countries. And during the last, since the sign of the 20 journey agenda, we've basically started working with with evaluation professionals and civil servants to try to find out how can we actually use evaluation. Should we use evaluation as part of Agenda 2030? How can we do it? So the first thing which comes to mind when we talk about evaluation and monitoring of the SDGs is the gigantic number of goals, targets, and indicators, which sometimes put off actually people who have to report and deal with this agenda. So really, you know, we have 17 goals, 169 targets, 232 indicators, and one big question: how do we know if we are on the right track? Sometimes this is not easy, right? Especially in light of national trajectories towards sustainable development and national choices, because at the end of the day, of course, every government has to prioritize their own goals according to their own contextual circumstances. So the big question is, how do we connect these national and local priorities with such a gigantic framework? And in the evaluation, that question means, how do we know? How do we know if we have achieved anything? How do we know if we are actually on the right track? And I think the answer is, we still don't know. Nobody knows really, because these are big questions. And to answer these big questions, we need a lot of minds, several trials and attempts, and also perseveration and people who are not afraid to fail. So as Sada was saying, this guide is the result of the work of 40 evaluation professionals and also government officials, and also the logical consequence of the work which had started in 2016. So is this guide a final response? I would say that it isn't. It actually doesn't want to be a final response. It doesn't want to be prescriptive, because it is rather a journey and a contribution which aims to move us a little bit forward. And the main reason is that the clock is ticking. 2030 is only 10 years ahead of us, and we really need to accelerate if we want the SDGs to have an impact at all. When the agenda was signed, the SDGs were actually marking a big difference with the previous framework, the Millennium Development Goal, because it eventually recognized the complexity of our world. And for the first time, the agenda was also recognizing the role of evaluation. But as we know, the words in international agreement can easily become empty slogans, which don't have any impact at all. And to have an impact, we need to give meaning to words with actions. But then actions can actually, you know, they have to be, sometimes they have an impact, but it's a negative impact. So our partners have actually taken action. Finland and Nigeria in particular have started this journey and have started to think about how can we implement, how can we actually conduct an evaluation, a national evaluation against Agenda 2030 in our country. So the big theories and frameworks alone don't change the world, and the concepts alone don't change the world. The practice does change the world, but it can change it in a bad way if it is not guided by self-reflection and critical thinking. And in 2016, country-led evaluation was just a concept, and now I think we are a little bit ahead on that concept, thanks to those who actually have implemented and tried innovative approaches. So the guide is actually built on the practice of those early adopters and aims to provide commissioners and evaluators with tools for thinking through the challenges of sustainable development. Because if we want to take seriously sustainable development, we cannot avoid the difficult choices and the difficult questions. A more green economy means disruption of previous economic pattern. Lifting people out of poverty means considering the environmental cost of those actions. Adapting to climate change implies reflecting on different future scenarios, which can be well beyond the 1.5 degrees Celsius ceiling. So these are all difficult choices and difficult questions, and in many cases it means thinking about trade-offs and thinking about win-win alongside each other. It's not all win-win. It's actually, there are a lot of difficult choices to be made. So evaluation is a tool to generate dialogue around evidence, and it should help to mediate these contrasting values and interests. And that's what we try to convey in the guide, is the experience, the practical experience, which not always goes right, of conducting evaluation, which tries to deal with these conflicting interests and values in making, in helping and facilitating people to make value judgments. And the guide provides actually is built around 4 very simple messages. The first one is that evidence use is the king, because the value of an evaluation is equal to its intended use. And thus we need to identify and engage the possible users of SDG evaluation at the very beginning of the exercise. Secondly, we need to define the scope and focus through participatory approaches. And this is because the SDGs will inevitably actually create winners and losers. And the implementation can't always be a win-win. And therefore, the dialogue at the beginning of an evaluation, which needs to go through the evaluation, is key and fundamental. Now, we all know that actually participatory approaches, can be quite an empty word sometimes, but we need to give meaning to it in a way that is actually helping to make a fair assessment where everybody, where different voices are heard. So you need to actually identify and strike the right balance of participation as much as give, consider also the cost and the effort to facilitate participation. Thirdly, there is a big risk to miss the forest for the trees. If we look at all these targets and indicators, many governments and many countries, they don't have those statistical and monitoring system in place. So this is why we think it could be was helpful to look at the principles underpinning Agenda 2030 to build around questions that could guide the assessment of national policies. And my colleague Dorothy Lucks will go more in detail into those principles. Finally, the fourth big point we wanted to stress is the importance to reconstruct the logic underpinning national policies. Most countries don't have a national development plan to implement the SDGs. I just had a very useful conversation with Irish colleagues. They've actually got a national plan for implementing the SDGs, but that's not often the case. For example, Finland, they used to have a lot of policies about sustainable development, probably some of the oldest one in the world, but they don't have an action plan as such, whereas they do have it now. So in doing an evaluation is also useful to think about the goals and the outcomes that we want to achieve. And we can use different tools. We can use theories of change. We can use system thinking. We can be creative. There are actually plenty of methodologies out there, but the concept is, how do we actually think about what the designer of policies and the policymaker wanted to achieve? And so this is what the guide is about. It's an approach built around the core principles of Agenda 2030 to look at your own national context through the lenses of sustainable development. And then the guide is not prescriptive, is actually trying just to spark conversation and to actually, provide guidance in a way that can be adapted to your own contextual circumstances. And I would leave the floor now to Ada and Dorothy and Gonzalo to continue the other presentations.
Thanks very much, Stefano, for this very, very insightful introduction to the guidebook. And I would like now to introduce our second speaker. Our second speaker is Dorothy Lucks. Dorothy is the Executive Director of SDF Global, a company that conducts strategic and evaluative work worldwide. And she is also the co-chair of EVALSDGs. Dorothy is also one of the co-authors of the guidebook, and she will be presenting the key steps for conducting an evaluation of the SDGs. Dorothy, thank you so much for being with us this time as well, and over to you. Can you please, Stefano, may I ask you to switch off your video, and Dorothy, put on your video if you don't mind. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Ada, very much, and I'm hoping that you are able to hear me okay.
Yes, loud and clear.
Excellent. And can you also see the presentation?
Not yet. I think Thomas has to remove the bio.
Okay, in the meantime, while that's all happening, I'll just provide a greeting to all of you who've joined us from wherever you are in the world. I'm in Australia and I'm on the edge of a Ramsar wetland, so sometimes the connection is not so good, but hopefully we will be able to hear things well. And I just want to add a little bit to what Stefano was saying about how the guidebook was put together. It was very much seen as a work in progress and a very dynamic process of bringing together people experienced in commissioning, not just evaluations, but who are involved in national statistics, in research, and bringing those different levels of thinking to bear on evaluation and saying, what is the added value that evaluation can bring into the follow-up and review of the Sustainable Development Goals? And to answer Ian's point as well, not just the Sustainable Development Goals, but the whole 2030 agenda. So we had a lot of discussion about the principles, but we also had discussion about ongoing sustainable development. So at the moment, I know we're all focused on the 2030 deadline, if you like, but sustainable development will continue after that. So there was discussion about the principles in the longer term as well. So is the presentation up now, please, Ada?
Dorothy, can you share your screen with us, please?
Yes, I thought I already was, but I will try again. Are we there now? Thomas?
It is loading, Dorothy.
Okay. All right. So I'm just going to follow on from what Stefano was saying.
It doesn't show. It doesn't show.
Okay, Thomas, are you able to put that up?
It's the black screen.
You have to shut off that. You have to stop sharing, Dorothy.
No, it works.
Okay, good. Good. It works now.
It works now? Whoa,
Yes.
there we are. Okay.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Oh, right, good. Okay, so in terms of looking at the connecting national priorities with the SDGs, as I've said, we took a fairly broader approach to that. But Stefano's point about the 4 key points, use, defining the scope in a participatory way, the principles and framing the methodology. I'm just going to go into those in a little bit more detail. In terms of the objective of the evaluation, if the objective was not clear, it was very clear from the discussions that the evaluation would not be of use. And there was quite a bit of discussion about how evaluations in the past have tended to sit on the shelves, and that evaluation needed to become much more relevant to decision makers in the era of the 2030 agenda, which meant a much more objective, a much more embedded approach in looking at what is the use of this information. Step 2, the preparation, investing in preparation.
Dorothy, are you there? Stefano, are you there? It seems we lost Dorothy.
Yes, I'm here.
Can you please continue while she's back?
Yes. Sorry for the inconvenience, but we are presenters from all over the world, and this can happen also, in different time zones and with different broadband connection. So, yeah, fortunately we have written the guide together, so I can chip in and give you an overview. Dorothy, we can't hear you anymore. So I will go through the steps while waiting for Dorothy to come back if her connection goes better. And if you hear our voices overlapping, please let us know. Okay. So identify the overall objective of the evaluation. This is step 1, what you can find in the guide is basically a reflection on how to engage different possible users of evaluation. As you know, the guide is very much a guide for commissioners. We wanted to make that clear from the beginning because we thought, we're not going to go into the methodological discussion now because we have to set the right questions first. So from where we are at right now in the discussion around this topic, it is still needed to actually define what an SDG evaluation or an Agenda 2030 evaluation is. So that's why the focus is very much on commissioner and on how we can actually build the foundation for this type of evaluation. So step 1 is very much around identify the objective of the evaluation. And with such a broad topic, it becomes a key question, a key task. The first step is to engage the decision maker, is to try to understand how. Now we see different. Sorry, just 1 second. I'm just trying to coordinate with the slides on the background. Shall I share mine, Thomas, while we wait for Dorothy? I have one
Stefano.
slide. Which could... Oh, you can. Okay, great.
Okay,
sorry.
You're back.
I'm back. Sorry, where did you get to?
Step 1.
Oh, fun. Oh dear. All right, I will pick up the pace a little bit then.
Yes.
Okay, so okay, step 1, defining the objectives, the scope. Be very realistic about the scope. We had a lot of discussions about that, and linking in with other national processes that are ongoing. It might be a VNR process, it might be reviews of laws. Step 3, very important, and this is quite different from a lot of the other evaluation, actually looking at the agenda principles. So for those of you who haven't read the guide yet, go to page 30 to 32. There it goes through the principles in much more detail and how you can actually use the principles as a bit of a checklist to say, is the evaluation really considering the key points of the 2030 agenda?
Dorothy, can you use presentation mode, please?
Yes. Okay, step 4, framing the evaluation. As Stefano has already said, there are many different evaluation methodologies which can be used. So for those who are commissioning evaluations, actually ensuring that the evaluators have thought through the logic that underpins the national priorities. So there are objectives which are present in plans and policies already. How do those link to the SDGs? That thinking process needs to be very explicit, determining the most appropriate approach. And we don't have time to go through that, but go back to the guide and have a look. And we're happy to answer questions on that. But the point to emphasize again is the communication and the stakeholder engagement, because that links back to use. So engaging stakeholders in the planned approach for the evaluation so that people understand the boundaries and the limitations of the methodology, but also the advantages so that it gives credibility to the evaluation. Highlighting synergies, trade-offs and limitations right at the beginning, but also then recognizing that this is just a stepping stone to what can be an ongoing process of evaluations. So quickly, how is country-led SDG evaluation unique? How does that differ from the more traditional program evaluations? For a start, the 2030 agenda provides a common framework which we've seen across a whole range of countries where they actually use the SDGs as a framework to kick off the evaluation and really probe into what are the synergies and trade-offs? How do they link between national policies and local action? How does that occur and how can it occur in a better way? The principles-focused approach really gets to the heart of what is valued, linking into the objectives. So the evaluation criteria people are very familiar with, evaluation practice people are familiar with, but what does the use of the principles add in terms of value to understanding and deepening the causal linkages and the approaches to be taken in future? The country-led SDGs, it's very clear that it's country-led. So political engagement is important. Evaluation in the past has been seen as something more neutral. With focusing on use, political engagement is very important, and leveraging of existing national policies and plans and identification of local champions for the particular objective of the evaluations. And the drawing on evidence from various sources, so it's much farther beyond the indicators and targets of the SDGs. It goes beyond performance into systemic causes and looking at what can actually be changed in a systemic way to accelerate progress. And it also allows telling stories, case studies, examples, which can help with understanding and promoting solutions to the issues being faced at the country level. And this kind of evaluation can be very flexible and adaptable to context. For instance, we know that in the COVID-19 period, we know that evaluations are still going on and they're adapting. We're looking at climate change, which goes beyond the scope of the 2030 agenda into beyond 2030. So the evaluations that are being done now are actually working to change countries well into the future, as well as for the 2030 agenda. So I'm sorry about the connection problems, but I'll hand over now back to Ada.
Thanks very much, Dorothy. Indeed, there are already some questions on the chat and some comments that I'm taking note of. And when we reach the Q&A part, rest assured that your comments will be shared. Now, I would like to, with many thanks for Dorothy for her insightful walk us through the steps towards conducting the national SDGs evaluation. I would like to give the floor to Gonzalo Hernández Licona. Gonzalo Hernández Licona is a very strong, experienced evaluator. He is actually a leader in social policy evaluation and poverty measure, especially in Latin America. Since March 2020, he is the director of the Multidimensional Poverty Peer Network. He was the executive secretary of Coneval, the National Council for the Evaluation of Social Development Policy, in Mexico between 2005 and 2018. Gonzalo holds a PhD in economics from the University of Oxford and a master's degree in economics from the University of Essex. Gonzalo is also a co-author of the Guidebook and also has been very instrumental in providing comments throughout the process of conducting the Guidebook. Gonzalo, it's a real pleasure to have you with us this morning, this afternoon for some, and this evening. So welcome, a very warm welcome over to you, Gonzalo.
Thank you very much, Ada. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to Stefano and to all of you. While I load the presentation, I just really wish that every one of us are doing well. I think the presentation is on. I think that all of you are doing well in wherever you are. I don't know why it says I cannot charge this one. I don't know why. Thomas, I cannot charge it, but I wonder if you can do it.
Yes.
Anyway, so I think that today's COVID crisis really reminded us that the importance of good technical information, knowledge, and planning. And evaluation precisely is about information, knowledge, planning, and well-being. So although it's tempting now to focus only on today's big problem, which it is, but we need to go beyond today and think about tomorrow as well. if we do well in development, specifically in terms of leave no one behind, poverty reduction, efficient social protection systems and rights, then we will be better off after the COVID problem and to cope with similar risks in the future. So if we do well in terms of development, if we address development better this time, then we will be better off when things go wrong as they happen today. So really, COVID reminded us that we live in an interconnected world, and we need good information and good technical guidance. And precisely, the SDGs is about an interconnected world, a complex world. So it's really great to have this guide, Evaluation to Connect National Priorities with SDGs. We need to remember that the 2030 agenda, it's a political agreement, and there is no step-by-step handbook. Yes, we're doing fine here. You go to the next one, please. So we are, SDGs and the agenda it's a political agreement, and there's no step-by-step handbook on implementation. So the UN didn't give us like a guide to follow the SDGs. It requires immense amount of coordination.
Gonzalo,
Yeah.
can you? There is a note there that if you can get closer to the mic.
All right.
Voice is a bit low. Thank you.
Okay. So So can you hear me well there?
Yes, and Gonzalo, you can take over as presenter of the presentation.
Yeah,
so you
sure,
can
sure,
control.
thank you. So as Stefano was saying, it is very difficult to handle 169 targets and 232 indicators, and it could even become a bureaucratic exercise. That is why, and I will always say, and we have this chart I always like, that development and SDGs is very similar to bowling strategy, where, you know, if you remember the bowling strategy where you have only 2 shots to get down 10 pins. So you don't have 10 shots or 20 shots to get down 10 pins. You only have 2 shots. And that's what happens with countries. In countries, we have a budget this year, we have a budget next year, we have a budget, one limited budget from now until 2030, which means that we don't have enough bullets to pin down all the indicators and to reduce development in all the targets. Therefore, it's very important to prioritize. How can we select the most important targets and indicators, which then those will help with other targets and indicators. So it's very similar to this bowling strategy. So the idea, therefore, in every country is how can we combine, as the guide says, the priorities of the country with this umbrella of the SDGs. And I think when countries do well, it's because they prioritize well. And this is so in the guide, I just want to point 3 very important elements. First, please take a look at what happened in Finland, Nigeria, and Costa Rica, 3 countries which really took SDGs and the evaluation process into account very well. We really have to learn from them. Of course, every country will do differently, but I think we have to, if we read those examples, it will be great. The second point that is in the guidebook is design an evaluation in a participatory process. I mean, it's very common for evaluators to think that we are the ones who know, and the government doesn't know. I mean, we are the experts, we are PhDs, we understand numbers, and the government, they don't do that. That's a really big mistake. I think the evaluation process has to go hand with all stakeholders, and every voice is important. And I mean, if we don't take into account the points of view of program managers, if we don't take into account the points of view of ministers and under ministers and even the president or the prime minister, then our evaluation process won't get very far. Or we will produce documents. Some of them will be published in nice journals, but I don't think they will be useful for the country and for development. And the third element I would like to underline about the guide, it's this idea of integrating the SDG planning with the national planning and with the monitoring and evaluation systems. Sometimes I can see countries where government is working as usual, and then they have a separate window for SDGs. So the government is working in the internal priorities, and then they set up a different thing for SDGs. And so you have two different plannings, and of course they don't connect each other very well. I mean, ideally, the national planning and the national development has to do with SDGs as well. So the idea is, how can we combine both in a better way? So and the usual example I always have is in cases where countries where you have a multidimensional poverty indicator. That's a very good entry point sometimes for the SDGs, because if you have a multidimensional poverty strategy, you have an indicator which is key for the SDGs, which is reduction of poverty reduction. So that's a key element for SDGs. And then in a multidimensional poverty indicator, and this is the example for Mexico, it is started with the Mexican priorities in the Constitution and the Social Development Law. It said we need to reduce poverty in all these dimensions: access to education, access to health, access to food, access to housing and services, access to social security, and of course income. And therefore, if we address poverty and if we assign different goals to different ministries, then we will be also addressing some of the targets of SDGs. And therefore, when you combine those priorities, I think you can handle SDGs in a better way. It doesn't mean that you stop with poverty. You should carry on to, of course, the other areas, but then it's easier for countries' planning and for countries' coordination to move forward. Couple of some threats that we saw last year when we wrote the Global Sustainable Development Report 2019. Very important threats which are happening now, even 5 years after the starting of SDGs. Rising inequalities, climate change, biodiversity loss, increasing amount of waste, especially e-waste. We haven't done well on maternal mortality, hunger and malnutrition, mortality from non-communicable diseases, primary school enrollment, water stress, and political and economic power to women. We had those problems before. Imagine those problems in the middle of COVID and afterwards. So those targets will be even more important. Some challenges in the implementation of SDGs. Countries may only make cosmetic things for the agenda. So countries may say, well, I have to go to the UN in September, let's do something about it only for that. Or the process may be rather bureaucratic. And the agenda may include, as I said, monitoring and indicators separately. Or sometimes governments ask to align public programs with SDGs, and that is not enough. And sometimes the agenda may confound public operators, because some operators say, well, I understand what the government was telling me before, and now they are telling me to follow the agenda with more indicators. So if we plan together, if we have together the process for SDGs and the priorities for the countries, we will be better off. And finally, I have to say, and we said that in New York last year, that evaluation, of course, is about precise information, but it's also about stories and narratives. So with evaluation, what story can we tell? Because we prefer to give the public, the citizens, a very nice and structured story and narrative with good data, with good information, instead of the very attractive narratives that some presidents are giving us without the proper evaluation and without good facts. So we can have nice narratives with good facts or with bad facts. So let's use evaluation to tell an attractive story using facts. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Gonzalo. I think people got excited when you mentioned the situation pre-COVID and now, and there are already questions and comments on the chat that, of course, I'm compiling, and we will take them during the Q&A. Thanks very much again, Gonzalo. Now our last speaker that will speak briefly about the lessons in Finland is Anu Saxén. Anu is the Director of Development Evaluation Unit at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. Before joining the Evaluation Unit, she was the Deputy of Mission at the Finnish Embassy in South Africa. She has almost 30 years of experience in different positions in the political and development affairs, private business, international business development, and project management. She has also held different managerial and leadership positions in donor and international financing institutions such as European Commission and the World Bank. Anu is one of the main partners of this undertaking, and she is not only a good supporter and a co-author of the guidebook, but also she is one of the stakeholders that has been very much involved in the Finnish experience that is quoted in the guidebook, and today she will be sharing some lessons on the Finland experience. Anu, always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Ada. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dorothy, Gonzalo, and Stefano, for your presentations. So we thank you for taking us to the journey and learn about the evaluation process. And Gonzalo also reminded us on the political environment where we are living. So nicely they complemented each other. So I have just a few remarks to make before I present the Finnish lessons learned or recommendations. So I would like to really think about the planning point of view of my presentation or my comments. There is a proverb saying that well planned is halfly done, and I really think that's what it is all about, like a guidebook also said, and what we heard from all the presenters. So I fully agree what Stefano said and also repeated or complemented by Dorothy, so that we need to recognize the users and who are and identify the stakeholders group. We need to understand whether the evaluation is for accountability or learning purposes. Without those things, we can't think about the scope and focus of the evaluations. So utility is crucial when planning the evaluation process, methodology, content, and resources needed. And Dorothy also emphasized very much about the objective. So it's important to agree on the objective of the evaluation. But we also need to be sure that we know what the principles of and the criteria to Agenda 2030 are. So they need to be clear when designing the content and estimating the costs of the evaluation. She also reminded us, which is important, that it's not enough that we have completed an evaluations. So we really need to support the users and the use of the evaluation. So it's even more important than the evaluation as such. So you can never invest too much on the communication plan. You need to communicate properly the results and recommendations. The audience is large, it's civil society, decision makers, politicians. So you need to use the proper language so that you can convey the right message. The preparation of the communication plan, you should start from the beginning of the evaluation and keep the stakeholders all the time on board. And then also that you have to plan the next steps once you have completed the evaluation. So how to implement the recommendations and how to organize the monitoring of the results. Like Gonzalo also said that in order to save money, time, the applications, and to optimize the resources needed, SDG evaluation should be closely linked to the national MET systems. Otherwise, you are really wasting money and time. Gonzalo also mentioned that we need to be aware, we need to build the evaluation of the national priorities and challenges. So Agenda 2030 is a nationwide objective, and therefore it's very, very important that the evaluation covers as many aspects as possible. It's highly recommended that the evaluation process is participatory, as all the presenters said many times. It should be also cross-sectoral, involving civil society, decision makers, and all relevant sectors. I think this is easier said than done. It's very, very tricky, and that is something we found in and experienced in Finland. So in order to design an effective and smooth evaluation, it should also same time be focused. So more people, more stakeholders, more politicians you are on board, more complex it becomes. So try to keep it focused at the same time. It's not easy. So once again, the presenters, thank you very much for your points. Very, very valuable. But now to Finland. So I think that you all know, you have heard many times, that Finland was the first country in the world who conducted its evaluation on sustainable development policy. We really wish we had had this guidebook the time we were planning and conducting our evaluation. It would have been so, so useful. We made it, and we are proud of it. It was a success, and it has been used all over the country, and it has been referred many times internationally. But if we did it now, it may look a bit different. So we have learned our lessons. Especially the process could look different. So we learned a lot, and we would like to share our lessons learned with you. But I'm also happy to say that our lessons learned and recommendations are very much what all the presenters also reminded us. So Thomas, are you presenting the slides? Because I can't see them, but doesn't matter.
Yes.
Okay, good. So the first thing is that we need to be timely. We need to plan carefully and be focused. We were in a hurry a bit in Finland, so we started it before the planning or the design was completed. So we should have invested more, especially on drafting the evaluation questions. Initially, they were far too many and they were far too complex. So the one recommendation or lessons learned is that the evaluation questions should be short, should be clear, and they should be agreed as early as possible so that you can keep them in your mind throughout the process. And also, like said many times, create ownership. So this is not a commissioner's evaluation. It's a nationwide evaluation. The owners are the public and the civil society and the whole nation. So also the political decision makers, keep them on board all the time. And a bit the same line, so that keep up the participatory spirit. So don't forget the stakeholders along the journey. But also make clear to them that all expectations cannot be met. So we are too many, and we have too many opinions and interests. So the large audience is a bit of a challenge, but we can live with it if the evaluation has been properly planned. Also allocate enough time for the entire evaluation process. Again, this is something what we learned So our evaluation took only 2 months, and it was far too short for this kind of complex evaluations. And then when you write the reports, we recommend to sort of follow a conservative evaluation format. Again, keep in mind that you are dealing with civil society, you are dealing with technical experts, politicians, etc., etc. So if you really would like to get the message through of this complex evaluation, so try to use the language everybody understands. And the same line, so the recommendations should be well formulated, clear and easy to understand. So you can't generalize too much, but using the right language, you can engage politicians, civil society and sectoral experts. And be optimistic, be positive. Focus also on opportunities, not only the challenges. Try to convey positive messages. And visualize and simplify the complex issues. You can't do that ever too much. So it's an important communication thing again. And then when communicating the results, tie it to actual challenges of the society and focus on the most important priorities. Again, the audience is large, and this is really a challenge and tricky thing. It needs a lot of work. Don't underestimate the work needed for that. And then lastly but not least, so that dissemination plan is important. Like I think Stefano said that if evaluation is not used, it's not worth spending so much money and conducting a complex evaluation. So prepare it as early as possible and keep it in your mind throughout the process, and don't finish it once the evaluation been completed. Keep on implementing your complete communication plan and update it accordingly during the monitoring stage as well. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anu. This was very clear and very helpful. The practical experience is actually what also people are eager to learn about. And we had 4 presenters this morning. It has been very rich. Now we are going to pass to the Q&A. So please feel free to write your questions or your comments on the chat bar. We have already various comments and questions, so while participants are writing additional questions, I would like to address some of the questions that have been posed now already. So I think I will put together 2 or 3 questions and share it with the presenters. One group of questions talk about the guide is for the demand side stakeholders, whether there is another guide for supply side stakeholders to actually ensure that they will play a role in connecting the SDGs with national priorities. And a question linked to that is that it will also be helpful to hear your insights about how to involve the most marginalized people from the start of the design process of the evaluation to ensure that they are not left behind in the process. So let's take these 2 questions first. I think that Stefano can answer about the guide and whether there is another guide or there is a name or there are contents that can be also useful for the supply side in the actual guide, and also how to ensure that the most marginalized are involved since the start of the design of process of the evaluation. Over to you, Stefano. Thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Ada, and thanks for the questions, which I think came from Shaima, if I'm not wrong. And so yes, I mean, in terms of the guide, we on purpose actually we didn't want to touch on methodologies because, well, for a number of reasons. First of all, and when I talk about methodologies, I mean from, I suppose the supply side would be more interested in methods to evaluate trade-offs, for example, or how to account for trade-offs in your assessment of a national policy when it comes to sustainable development. But there were a number of limitations that we have considered, and therefore we have decided on purpose not to do so because the conversation is not yet there because we needed to set the questions first, and therefore we had to have the discussion, right? And I think we still need to have this discussion about what are the right questions to be addressed when we are talking about SDG evaluation. We need to have a discussion about the evaluant. So what are we evaluating when there are 232 indicators and 17 goals and pretty much, the full policy spectrum of a national government? So I think the very first task we tried to do was actually to have a discussion and to pin down what we are exactly evaluating when we are talking about Agenda 2030 evaluation. So that was the first reason. In terms of the resources, yes, we do mention on the basis of the questions that you can find in the guide, there is also a section on possible methodologies that could be employed to answer those questions. But again, I think those should be taken with a pinch of salt because methodologies are always, more than methodologies, actually the combination of different methodologies are always evolving. And I think it is important not to restrain this innovation process. And therefore, we mention quite a few methodologies that could be useful in an SDG evaluation process, and that could be combined in many different ways. But this doesn't actually prescribe one method over another. So to cut it short, basically, yes, you can find some suggestions about the methodologies that can help you to, for example, foster participation or to answer different type of questions, and different methods that you can use with different budget that you have as well. So suggestions, yes, you can find, but there aren't actually definitive answer, and that was a conscious decision. We hope that these discussion of methods will spark in the evaluation sector, and we'll hear more at different conferences around the world. Also, there are some suggestions about resources that you can use in case you want to use one method over another. Cost-benefit analysis of spillover effects, for example, or the in-depth case studies to understand some path-dependent outcome and so forth. That's the first one. The second one on the engagement. That's a very difficult question, I think, to answer. It's very easy to say, yes, the evaluation should be participatory. It must be, but then it's very difficult to implement. Of course, the key, one of the crucial point is representative, the engagement of recognized representative from the most marginalized group. When we talk about evaluation at national context, of course, it's all about identifying those who really represent those sector of the population and the interests of those sector of the population. How to engage them at the outset. In many cases, there are organized groups that can be engaged. Of course, we have to be mindful of politics, and sometimes, they may not fully represent they might not be recognized by everybody in the groups of people living in poverty and exclusion. But I think the key is to have them, on your radar in the first instance, and to make an effort to actually identify those. That would be my answer from experience.
Thanks very much, Stefano. There is a group of questions that are related to COVID-19. They refer, I will group them into one because they can be connected. If we were writing the guidebook again now in this current period of COVID-19, what changes would be made to take into account the crisis? Taking into account that there are huge resources constraints and also the private sector is in recession. What methodological changes can be done for SDGs evaluations in the current COVID-19 period? And there is also a question related to that, asked by Rashmi, saying what would be the theory of change that we would need now if we were to write the guidebook again, or we would like to make some adjustments to the guidebook. Over to you. Thank you. Who would like to respond that? Dorothy, Gonzalo, Stefano?
Ada, I'm happy to
yes,
give
please,
at least
Dorothy, go ahead.
An initial quick point there, because I'm doing quite a bit of work around the COVID-19 evaluations at the moment, some ongoing evaluations where we're having to be quite creative and adjusting methodologies. So in answer to the question about how much change would there be to the guidebook, probably not that much, apart from perhaps to add a section on how to be responsive to unforeseen circumstances. But some of the things that are coming up are more around adaptive methodologies. For instance, in creativity and using online technologies, not just online, but telephone. I noticed there was a question on resource strapped areas. Telephone, we're doing a lot of telephone work with people to connect, to hear their stories, to talk to people and find out what's happening. More probing, making the questions more focused. I think Anu made that point very clearly, that if there are resource constraints, make the questions clearer, more focused, so that they still can be following the principles of use and sense making within the current context. So those are just a few very quick points of things where we are, as evaluators, adjusting to the COVID-19 process and still doing national evaluations. Over.
Dorothy, before you go, there are some follow-up questions related to whether the SDGs evaluations can be conducted entirely remotely or a combination, and what does it imply during, is it possible also real-time evaluations, quicker evaluations, and so is there a change also in the spectrum of evaluations that can be done? Over.
Thank you for that additional question, because there was one other point I really wanted to make. And one of the things we're trying to do is recognizing that mobility is an issue, is actually investing in local evaluation capacity development through online mechanisms. So actually building local evaluation capacity using simple questions, asking people to circulate in their own environments as restrictions are eased, but only in localized areas, actually beginning to capture information from local people guided by evaluators rather than doing that themselves. So yeah, a lot of creativity going on. Over.
Thanks very much, Dorothy. Gonzalo, there are some questions that probably you can respond. The questions are related to how to ensure the political will of the governments to undertake national evaluations, provided that we are facing a crisis there now, and also how to ensure that the the mechanisms that are needed at the national level will be put in place in order for national evaluation of the SDGs to happen, and what can we do as evaluators to ensure that these conditions will be put in place. Over to you. Thanks very much, Gonzalo. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Sara. Can you hear me well?
Loud and clear.
Very excellent. So, yeah, so it's very important, as we said before, and it's in the guidebook, that the participatory process should be in place. And of course, the most important, I would say, participant on this process is when you as an evaluator or the evaluator group, you are evaluating a program, a ministry, the whole ministry or the whole process. Therefore, you need the participation and the points of view from that program manager, from that minister, and from that the office of the president, if that's possible. And that element should be there from the beginning. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes you have to struggle because people sometimes don't like to be evaluated, and it makes sense. But when you talk, the more you communicate, the more convincing you can be, and therefore the government or the program managers will be more able to give you the information that you need. So that participatory process is important. We'll need to capture various voices. Sometimes we don't have to use the same tool to capture different voices, but we need to have that. And at the same time, we have to show that as an evaluator, you are evaluating anyway. So even if a program doesn't really want to be evaluated, on the other, you have another ace under the sleeve where you say, well, I'm going to say things about your program and I'm going to make them public. If you participate, it will be better off because we're doing that anyway. So we can do that when the evaluation community has some independence. And you are, of course, in a democratic environment. So you, in fact, evaluation is like an art, and therefore, every time you need different political skills to convince people about how to produce, how to engage with evaluation. And I want to say something, if that's possible, about the communication strategy. It has to do, again, with exchange with various actors. So, of course, the very first time you talk about the results of evaluation, you have to be in a room together with the person who's responsible of the program, of the strategy, without any public. You have to be very frank about your findings. You have to say, really this is happening and we found this and that. And so you have to be very frank. And then the second step is how to make that public. And of course, the language should be different, not the figures and the findings. The findings are the same, but the language should be different. And when we make evaluations public, I think we need to include always. We have to show improvements made already by government or by the program or by the strategy due to the evaluation findings, and that is easier to communicate. And finally, let me go back to the narrative. Sometimes when you read evaluations, they are really, really, really boring, full of data and full of technical stuff, and it's really not very clear for the people. And therefore, when someone easily says, well, you can drink disinfectant, that's more appealing than a equation. So we really need to be more, we have to think carefully about how we tell our findings. How can we produce the narrative to be really appealing for the public?
Thanks very much, Gonzalo. There is a question about the translation of the guidebooks. I would like to take advantage to announce that the guidebook has been translated already into French and into Spanish. We are in the process of finalization of the last part of the work, working with the company for the layout, and we should have the layout and the design, and we should have news for you next week about, we will share the links to these guidebooks in Spanish and in French. Anu, there are two questions that you can probably share your thoughts about it. It says, based on the experience of Finland and Nigeria, who should be the national agency responsible of coordinating and managing the national evaluation? And what do you suggest in terms of tips for making the dissemination to have a better impact at the national level, and to get the buy-in not only of politicians, but also of the different stakeholders in society? Over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Ada, and thank you for the good questions. I have another one. I also thought that it is for me. But yes, so that our Prime Minister is a chair of our National Development Committee, and it's the Prime Minister's office who is commissioning the evaluation and also doing the monitoring and preparing the VNRs, etc. And we find it very, very good. So the commitment comes from the highest level possible in the country, and also the Prime Minister's office, so that they have access to all sectoral ministries. So we have found that solution very good and neutral sort of. Dissemination, so that we have, as I mentioned, the National Sustainable Development Committee, and there are members also from our Parliament Development Committee, and they are very active. They organize many webinars and Studia Generalia and all kinds of, and of course we have a newsletter which comes once a month. But what we have been thinking that according to our law, so we have to evaluate our Agenda 2030 or National Development Policy every 4 years, so once during the government period. And we are thinking that's maybe too seldom. Maybe we should do something more often. So we have been thinking to invest more on monitoring, maybe considering some kind of real-time evaluation or a lighter midterm review before we then go for the four-year full-fledged evaluation. So that's still work in progress. We haven't decided yet what to do. Prakash, you asked about the research. Yes, you are absolutely right. We also figure out that we should have used more research information and data, but we simply didn't reserve enough time for that one. So yes, next time we hope that we have more research information and data available. Yeah, and then Gladys, you also, in your comment, I liked it very much. You mentioned that the conservative format of reporting. Yeah, we fully agree, and we have got very good feedback on that one, that the report, especially the dissemination later on, was the language everybody can understand, and it helps them to go for the recommendations. So thank you very much.
Okay, we are running out of time and some participants are already leaving. There is a comment on how this we can advocate in high-level political forums and other forums for evaluation of the SDGs. Actually, we, the 4 partners, are already doing that. We presented the side event last year. We are planning to present the side event this year. Also, we have some other resources related to that, so it's actually possible. I would just like to group some other questions, and this will be the last. I know that there will be some few questions, very few, lagging behind, but we'll keep a record of them, and we will send the responses by email. So the other set of questions are related to the number of indicators and targets. It basically says, how can countries balance the number of indicators to measure ongoing programs and make efforts to be innovative in employing new strategies and programs. Related to that, there are two questions that I'd like the presenters to take the three together in order to save time. Should the local targets be reviewed? And the other that is very much related is, instead of having a long list of targets and indicators and to work and prioritizing afterwards, would not it be better to just start by the key areas and the key priorities that we want to address? Who would like to respond to those questions related to indicators and targets, please? Stefano, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I'm happy to just take 1 minute. I know that we are running out of time, but just to say, I think, in indicators and targets, the reality is, well, first of all, my very own perspective, I think that indicators are more useful than targets. And so indicators are very, very important. But at the end of the day, what is going to be evaluated by countries is what they think is going to be useful for their own political agendas. Any other exercise will be, I don't think it will affect policy in a country, because of course every country is deemed to have their own political debate. So I think I would take it more the other way around. It's more like which indicators or targets are relevant to each country according to their own strategic choices. So just to mention an example, Nigeria, which is one of the cases, they have selected 3 SDGs which are related to their economic recovery plan: education, health, and the one on poverty, tackling poverty. So because those are relevant to their own internal debates. So I would take it from the other side. Over.
Very much to all the presenters. We have to close now. We went beyond the time and participants have to go. Some of them have already left. We have taken note of the few of the questions. There is a question that has been posed twice about national ownership, and that there are some, if you read the guidebook, you will get some insights about that. Of course, national ownership is considered to be key. There is also a question saying that the recommendations in the post-COVID-19 era will have to change. Will have to change in terms of nature, strategic, etc. And these are questions that, of course, are part of the discussion, and I think that that we will take all of them into account. And Stefano, Dorothy, Anu, and Gonzalo will be happy to respond by email. And thank you very, very much for your participation, your engagement, your questions, your comments. A special thank you to Thomas and Celeste, who have been supporting the organization of this activity. Thomas and Celeste from UNICEF. On behalf of the 4 partners, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, IIED, EVALSDGs, and the Evaluation Office of UNICEF, we thank you very, very much, and we promise that we will be sharing with you the PowerPoints as well as the recording of this presentation in the coming days. And rest assured that this will not be the last webinar on this topic. We will continue the discussion, and of course, with your participation, the future discussions will be possible. Thank you very, very much. I wish you a good day, a good afternoon, a good evening to all of you. Bye-bye.